This is the Enjoyer Podcast. I'm your host, James Dixon. If you read Enjoyer.com, you know the name Bobby Mars. You've seen his work. Bobby is one of our most prolific writers. Along with O.W. Root, he's someone I'd put up there as someone I'd point to as a clear enjoyer of Michigan. He loves the place. He loves exploring the place. He loves talking about it and writing about it. And today we're blessed to have him as our guest. Bobby, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, James. Pleasure to be here, as always.
Absolutely. Bobby, we'll start you with an easy one. What do you enjoy about Michigan?
Michigan summer. I mean, every time I think about the state, that's what I always come back to. I went to U of M for undergrad and always found myself hanging around there in the summer, just like lazing around and floating down the river on tubes and drinking Oberon. And it's just, it's that kind of casual attitude and atmosphere of enjoyment, that I think of the most when I think back to my time in Michigan, and has the fondest memories for me, going up north to friends' cabins and things like that.
Absolutely. Traverse City is kind of an ongoing topic on the Enjoyer site. It's obviously a place that's changing. Are the changes for the better? Is it becoming something other than what it is? What do you see is going on in Traverse City right now?
It's the same dynamic that's happening in all of these places that become sought after destinations that people want to go to. Inevitably, that attracts attention, that attracts development. And then development causes local resentment because things are changing in a way, and maybe, in good ways, maybe in bad ways, depends on, your attitude, I guess, right? But I don't know, it's tough. I mean, it does, on the one hand, you do have with that development a move towards a kind of like mass culture, right? This kind of like American monolithic culture, right, in which places become less distinguished from each other in a broad sense. But on the other hand, development does bring prosperity in its own way. I don't have a clear-cut answer to this. I like to take maybe one opinion, at a time and try to advocate for that and see how it sits with me, right? Before I settled it. But it is interesting. I just visited my brother. My brother lives outside of DeWitt, it's near Lansing, and right in the downtown little street. It's this little town. One of the mid-level high-rises is going up there. And the first look he had to me was like, "Oh no, like, oh no, what is happening? This town is now changing and developing." And it's a complicated issue. It's a complicated issue that I think a lot of people are afraid of, but also could potentially be generative of new culture. I think that's the attitude I'm trying to take at the moment.
Right. I think about a place like University of Michigan, right? Ann Arbor.
Mm-hmm.
When I first went down there, you think about like an Urban Outfitters on State Street, or Safe Sex Store, or Middle Earth on South U. All these places that made the place distinct. It made it feel like one of a kind. It made it feel like a quirky little town. And now a lot of that is, a CVS or a Target, places that can be found anywhere. But then you say, okay, there's also a lot more places to live, really cool buildings, a lot going on, more students. I feel like it wouldn't be a bad thing to be a U of M student right about now either. So it's that same dynamic. Are you better off in the end or worse off?
I have mixed feelings about this too. I actually just finished a piece that hopefully will be coming up in the next couple of weeks about all of the development in Ann Arbor. Because at the moment, last time I was there, I think in July, the skyline is just dotted with new high rises, and I looked it up, and there's about 12 of them going up. 12 of these new luxury high rises, and there are a lot of spirited opinion pieces in the Michigan Daily about how it's ruining Ann Arbor and stifling campus culture, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm kind of taking the other take. I decided I'm going to be the contrarian here, and try to figure out what's really the issue here. And to me, it's not development. And in Ann Arbor especially, there's a housing shortage. Everybody knows this. The university's admitted, I think, an extra 10,000 students overall over the last decade since I was there. And there's been, almost no new housing. So it's just the rents are astronomical. There's no housing. Everybody knows that. High rises are one solution to it, in a way. Like, at least it'll increase the supply of housing. My issue with them, and I think this is the important issue, is that they're not culturally generative, right? Like, there's really, they're adding space, they're adding volume to the housing supply, but they're not filling that same cultural niche that housing has fit in Ann Arbor for a long time, which, I think back to my time, they're living in a kind of grimy off-campus house with 6 other guys.
Well, I was just going to ask, is the student ghetto on Greenwood really the height of civilization?
I think it needs to be protected. I think we need both. Is my point. I'm like, the student ghetto on Greenwood, the Greenwood Block Party is a beacon of
It is.
American civilization, I would say. And I think Ann Arbor needs that. And I think that the issue with the new development is that it doesn't assert itself enough confidently as a new thing and with a new place in the culture. I mean, I actually mentioned probably the earliest high rise to go up in Ann Arbor, which was, I think, known as Zaragon at the time. I think they've changed the name or whatever, but it was a very different building than the new buildings that have gone up. It's a little bit smaller. It's like very architecturally distinct. Like you go in there and they have these penthouses that are like 2 floors tall with like these hanging walkways. Like it's just like they're just baller. I mean, I remember like going to parties there being like, wow, okay, this is a new sort of thing on this campus. This actually, and I felt like it did, it did generate like a new kind of culture, maybe in a way some people didn't like. I think it's one of those things that was easy to envy if you're not a part of it. It's exclusive, it's luxurious, whatever. I think that that's the answer. I mean, I think that just if you're gonna make luxury high rises, like you need to make luxury high rises, and they need to be like they need to assert themselves in the culture in that way where they're creating something that's new. That they're like fun places to like have a party in.
And that's why
And
New
are
York
not
City
just
is plenty tall. No one would say it costs them, right?
right. Yeah. Well, you have to imagine, probably 100 years ago, the New Yorkers were talking about how the skyscrapers were ruining the city too. So, I mean, it does change.
Yeah.
Change is always scary. That's the truth of the matter. But I think change that nullifies things, or is just kind of like a nothing change. If these new high rises going up and the new development in places like Traverse City and all of that, like if all it promises are a few new apartments that are not adding anything that's culturally distinct to these unique places and like contributing to the life of them, you're going to get a lot of resentment, and
Yeah.
maybe if you do that too, people won't like what they're adding. But I think that's the better way to look at it. Like, development is necessary. Like we need to encourage that kind of development, but we need to encourage a kind of distinctive development that's going to add instead of just taking away or like leveling.
Absolutely. Bobby, you are one of the most gifted writers and just artists in general I've come across. Great photographer. If you listen to this podcast, Bobby shot the cover art with me in the Make News Local Again shirt. I mean, I'm just this goofy 40-year-old dude in suburban Detroit, and he made me look like I'm like Drew Pearson or Walter Lippmann, or just carrying more gravitas than I knew myself to have. I actually started sitting up a little straighter after that. Bobby, there's people listening who I'm sure have kids who are going down the creative path themselves. A young person, or maybe a person who has a little bit of new time on their hands. If they said, I'd like to become an enjoyer of Michigan, I just don't know how, what would you tell them?
Go out and do things. This is what I always told. This is what I always told my students back in my professor days. To enjoy things or to become a creative person, you have to live a life that's going to force that kind of internal dialogue. Like great art and great creation is not made sitting alone in a room. Well, maybe after the fact, you sit and you reflect and you do these things. But I always felt like the best artists, for me, and if I'm being honest, my best students were always students that like had lived an interesting life and they had things to reflect on. They had things to say in their work. And that, in part is to do with enjoyment. They like to go out and actually do things that are fun, that you enjoy, and also maybe to do things that you don't enjoy, to go out into the world and to encounter hardship and strife. I mean, I think it's the one thing nobody tells young people, I think, in general, these days, but especially young people going into, the more creative fields. Nobody's telling the art majors that the art world is competitive and it's ruthlessly competitive, and you need to know that. And you have to be willing to, stand up and advocate for yourself and for your work in that space. It's sort of everything other than what you'll hear, publicly about like accessibility and equality in the arts. Like, no. The art world is very cutthroat in its own way.
How so?
And
like, why would it be? I guess like from where I sit, my art and your art might be so different. I don't see where me kind of advocating for myself would make a difference. How does it work though?
part of it is just the logistics of it. I mean, I remember a trusted mentor of mine in grad school explaining to me at the time that, while I was friends with all of the other artists in my cohort, we were all in the same class and we were buddies. He said, listen, there are only so many galleries in the city. And you guys, next year are going to be competing with each other to get placement for your thesis shows. Like, that is just a very clear reality of the situation in a logistical sense. It's supply and demand. There are only so many galleries, only so many spaces. And the last few years have tightened that. I mean, the pandemic really was pretty decimating
Right.
for the arts, especially in the sort of smaller art cities. It really got to a place where a lot of my friends were not able to get venues for thesis shows. Like they had to kind of scramble just because of that. So that's part of it. Just the access to that, access to funding. I mean, you're part of working in a creative field. I mean, you're applying for grants, you're applying for faculty positions if that's what you want to
Yeah.
do.
You need a
And
patron.
there are more. You need a patron. Ideally, yes, exactly. I mean, something like that. Somebody who's gonna support your work and advocate for you. However, you're gonna find that. And the conventional paths towards patronage in the arts in America at the moment, being either higher education, faculty work, or kind of grant funding. That exists sort of tangentially with really the for-profit gallery scene, which kind of mostly exists in New York. There's a little in LA, whatever, but there are way more artists than exists funding and opportunity. So I think in some ways it's good. I think the competition is important. Like you have to know that you can't just lazily make things and expect everybody to love them,
Right.
right? Like you have to actually have something to say, and you have to be confident in your work. But I think it's one thing that's not told to burgeoning artists and creators, or even the people who want to enjoy life, as you say, want to go out into Michigan and to do things like that. Like doing things is a risk always, and you have to be willing to take that.
Right. But I think people like yourself would also say it beats the alternative. Like you couldn't imagine a life without art, without getting up and doing the things that make you an artist. You couldn't imagine just,
Really.
flipping let's watch the third episode of Cheaters today. You couldn't see that for yourself.
Well, there's always a time for TV, right? I mean, there has to be, but no, it's you have to have a kind of insane compulsion to undertake that kind of life. Like you have to be not just committed to it, but so almost delusionally committed to it, and self-confident that you're willing to do that, because you're going to face a lot of rejection. I mean, everybody does in life. This is just a true thing, but especially in the creative fields, you're going to apply to 10 grants and you get one of them if you're lucky,
Right.
which is great. You're happy to get that one, but you're not going to get all of them. And you have to be willing to take that rejection and keep persisting and move on, and you have to be willing to find new directions for your work and pivot into them in different ways, right? Like it's not always going to exist exactly how you imagine it.
You guys may or may not know this about Bobby. Bobby is not only a risk taker as an artist, he's actually a part of two needle in a haystack fields. He was also an academic at one point. Bobby, I loved your piece about your professors are afraid. What would you have people know about academia in Michigan, or just as you've seen it and experienced it circa 2024?
I think the best way to describe it for me, is that these jobs generally, especially in the humanities, people who are interested in humanities or interested in art, they see faculty employment in higher education as like the pinnacle goal. This is everybody wants to get this job. Everybody wants the tenure track professor job. It's seen as like kind of this, beacon of stability in an otherwise kind of unstable life as a creative. So people look for that, and it's seen as almost this opportunity to have your cake and eat it too. You get to have this job, which gives you a little prestige, gives you a little status in society that artists don't otherwise get. It gives you, stable money, a pension, my God, all these things.
Right.
And then I got one, and everybody was miserable. All of my colleagues, for the most part, didn't seem like particularly happy people, not with their job, not with kind of life. And it took a lot of time and reflection for me to understand sort of why that was. I mean, I would sit down and ask myself, like, my God, I have so many friends who have not been able to get jobs like this. And like everybody's like fighting tooth and nail to get them. And then why are the people who have them not happy and not satisfied?
So it's not like these are tortured artists. These are the artists who've found some measure of comfort, and they're not happy either.
They're the moderately successful artists, right? I mean, these are artists who are able to live a sort of comfortable life in a way. And maybe that's it in some regard. Maybe if you're like really in the game at the elite levels and you're showing at those kinds of galleries, that's a little more exciting and enticing. I think the stability is kind of an illusion for a lot of the types of people who are in creative fields. You kind of get into it and then it doesn't have that same zest that you imagined it might. It has its advantages otherwise. If you like teaching, especially, I mean, that to me was always the best part of the job. I love teaching and I love working with students. And the faculty I knew who really prioritized that, because there are great faculty, believe me. I mean, there are great faculty across the board. It doesn't matter what college you're at. You're going to find people who are brilliant and who are really engaged and love their students and prioritize that kind of engagement. And they're the happiest. They're the ones who are happy because they're really taking satisfaction in what is the bulk of the job. What is 95% of the job is working with the students and helping to, teach them and enrich their lives, especially in the creative fields. It's really rewarding. I mean, for me to still see students who I worked with years ago working in film photography stuff that I taught them, I see it on Instagram, and it always blows my mind. It's just an amazing thing. If you do that, and especially if you're a student, if you can find faculty like that to work with, like, you're going to have a really rewarding experience in higher education. The problem is, I would say that's not by any means the majority. I think the majority of faculty are in it for other reasons. Probably the best one being their own research, which is a noble goal in its own way. But I think these goals have been sort of divorced for a long time. Like, I think students on campus are seen as, and perhaps rightfully so, but they're the lowest on the totem pole, and they're not given much regard, despite their tuition paying for the entire enterprise.
Absolutely. As you look at Michigan and see, a state of 10 million people, a lot of stories to be told here. If you had to encourage a young enjoyer, I might go follow that angle. I might go follow this subculture. I might go follow this geography, this place. What's there to be found?
Get out into nature. I mean, that's the first thing I would say, especially now. It's beautiful. It's beautiful in Michigan at the moment. Go up north, go, do something outside with your friends. If you're in Ann Arbor, go sit in the Arb and hang out.
Please go to the Arb.
Yes, go to the Arb. Go to the Huron River. Bring your inflatable tubes and a 6-pack of beer and float down the river, and you'll be shocked. I used to love Forest Hill Cemetery over there, right next to the Arb. Yeah.
And I mean, you got Bo Schembechler, you got Fielding Yost, you got some of these great names, the founder of Ann Arbor, and you can't walk through an environment like that and not take stock.
Exactly.
Like, what kind of track am I on?
I think it's just, especially in the digital age, right? Which I'm not immune from. I mean, I'm a notorious Twitter addict in my own way, right? But it's so important, especially with that. And if you're somebody like that, to, stay grounded in the place that you live, to go out and encounter it, and you'll be shocked what comes out of that. Like, the kind of, the things that emerge. I mean, that was really, for me, like, how I got into photography in the first place. Was just trying to perceive the world around me through the implement of the camera and, like, bringing it with me everywhere and just, experimenting with it, almost in the way that like a plein air painter would do or something like that. It's that same impulse.
Right.
It's the same impulse to actually go out and experience the world and observe it and record those observations.
I could see a writer doing the same thing, like, go to a coffee shop, and if you, hear friends and try to imagine, are they friends? Are they lovers? Where are they at in the relation? Like, and just go where your mind will take you.
Well, isn't that the saying for writers? Write about what you know.
Yeah.
I think that's very true. I mean, you have to go out and observe. It's an old Vladimir Nabokov anecdote where he's asking, he's in a workshop with young writers, and he asks one of them, like, what kind of tree is that out the window? And the young writer doesn't know. He tells him, you'll never be a good writer because you're not actually observing the world around you. You lack the analytical qualities to even, classify and distinct, like, that's an oak tree. Like, if you don't know that, then what are you going to know? What are you going to observe?
Or the curiosity. If you don't know what it is, maybe you can tell me how it looks. Maybe you can tell me how it feels, right? Yeah, and we can get somewhere with this, but don't just tell me you don't know.
Yeah, right.
Bobby, where can people find more about yourself and about your work?
You can follow me on Twitter. That's the main way to encounter Bobby Mars. Is definitely follow me on Twitter. I do have a website as well that links from there that has some of my work and links to articles and writing and other things that I'm up to.
So we'll include all of that in the show notes. But Bobby, I want to thank you so much for being who you are and for enjoying Michigan.
Thanks so much, James. It's a pleasure to be here and talk to you.